What do you think about when I say mead? You probably think about angry men who made life miserable for some people during the Viking Age. Simply put, mead is made by mixing honey, water, and yeast. Then you let it ferment and you will have a wonderful beverage after some time. The people in Scandinavia were explorers during the Viking Age. And as you can imagine, they traveled from Northern Europe across the continent through rivers and reached places which offer different cultures and tastes. It is not unimaginable that honey was brought along since it won't spoil, and I'm thinking that maybe one Scandinavian who came in contact with oranges got an idea. In this video, I'm going to guide you through the process of making mead, which I'm going to spice up with orange zest to give it that orangey fruitiness. The first thing you need to do is to sanitize your equipment that will come in contact with your mead. This is done to prevent the growth of bacteria that could spoil it. Next, you'll need to rehydrate the yeast that will convert the sugar from the honey into alcohol. The rehydration is done by preparing a solution of water and a complex yeast nutrient mix called Fermentation. Lastly, one package of yeast is added to the nutrient solution. Now we need to prepare the honey and water mix that will be converted into mead. I used 2 kilograms of honey and 4 liters of water. That will be 4.4 pounds of honey and 1.1 gallons of water. In this mead, I'm using a Swedish raspberry blossom honey. When the mixture is ready, we want to understand how much sugar we have in the solution. This can easily be measured by using a tool called a hydrometer, which will give you the original gravity value, or the OG value. We can see that the OG value of this mead is 1.10. We can calculate the ABV, or alcohol by volume, at the end of the fermentation, since the OG value will drop as the yeast will convert the sugar into alcohol. If you like this content, please subscribe and like this video. When all of the honey has been dissolved, we can add the yeast solution that we prepared earlier. Then we can aerate the mixture to give the yeast some oxygen that it needs for its growth phase. Before putting the carboy in my closet for fermentation, I'm adding the sensor that will measure both temperature and the specific gravity. It will be connected to my Wi-Fi, so I will be able to track the fermentation process almost in real time. By the way, we will call it specific gravity instead of original gravity once the original gravity is changing. Here, I'm adding a blow-off tube that is filled with water and sanitization liquid to prevent microorganisms and particles from the outside to contaminate the mead. Bubbles mean that the pressure inside the carboy is higher than the outside, which is a sign of active fermentation. The sensor has given me the first measurement and it matches what I read on the hydrometer earlier. Now we put the carboy away and wait until the next day to check the fermentation process. As we can see on the lower graph, the specific gravity has dropped, which means that the fermentation has started. The two bulges in the middle of that graph shows that the sensor has been disturbed by something during the first hours. It could be due to bubbles or something else that has resulted from the start of the growth phase of the yeast. The honey and water mix does not give the yeast the ideal conditions for growth. Therefore, we will boost the growth with some additional nutrients, this time in the form of diammonium phosphate or DAP, which is a source of nitrogen that will promote yeast growth. "24 hours after the addition of DAP, you can actually see the intense activity from the yeast. The bubbles that can be seen is carbon dioxide, which is produced as sugar is converted into alcohol. 24 hours later, the yeast is still active. 6 days later, the yeast has converted all of the available sugar into alcohol. I know that the sugar is depleted since the specific gravity curve has flattened. The final value of the specific gravity is called the final gravity. So, the change of the original gravity from 1.10 to the final gravity of 0.99 results in an alcohol by volume content of 13.8%. Now it's time to spice things up. I'm collecting the zest of 5 oranges to add to the mead. In order to avoid bitterness, be careful not to bring any of that white stuff with the zest. Before adding the zest to the mead, we need to decontaminate it. I'm transferring the mead from the primary vessel to a secondary vessel in order to minimize the headspace, as I want to lower the risk of oxidation. "12 days later, it was time for yeast inactivation. This is done to prepare for the next step, which is the backsweetening step. The yeast inactivation is done by adding sulfite and potassium sorbate. The sulfite will prevent microorganisms from growing and inhibits yeast function. The potassium sorbate prevents yeast cells to multiply and continue fermentation. One day after yeast inactivation, we can add honey to sweeten the mead in a step called backsweetening. Since the yeast is inactive, the sugar from the honey that will be added will not be converted into alcohol. Now we're ready to clear the mead, making it more transparent and appealing to drink. This is done by simply letting gravity pull down the suspended particles that float around in the mead to fall to the bottom. And this can take a while. I'm adding bentonite to the mead in order to speed up the clearing process. The particles in bentonite will, with their negative charges, electrostatically interact with positively charged particles in the mead, which will adsorb to the bentonite particle surfaces and pull them down to the bottom of this vessel. Consequently, the mead will become more clear. "8 days after the addition of bentonite, the mead has become crystal clear. When we're happy with the clearness of the mead, it's time for bottling. I will use a siphon to transfer the mead from the vessel to the bottles. Notice that the vessel and the bottle are placed on different levels to make the siphoning work. I need to make sure that the yeast is inactive before capping the bottles, since I don't want to have any unwanted bottle explosion. So let's check the gravity again. It is higher than the final gravity after fermentation, since I added honey in the backsweetening step. This is expected, and it means that the yeast is inactive, so it's safe to bottle and cap the mead. Finally, the mead is done and I'm ready to try it. It's not too sweet and I can feel a floral note from the orange zest. Skål! Thank you very much for watching and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Bye!